My sister dumped mashed potatoes in my lap at family dinner and called it payback, but she didn't expect what I did next. I'm 25, and my older sister Zoe has been holding grudges against me for things I supposedly did years ago since we were kids. She's 28 and has always been the dramatic one in our family, the type of person who turns every minor disagreement into a major crisis and remembers every perceived slight for years afterward. What makes it worse is that our parents have always enabled her behavior by treating her outbursts as justified responses to whatever she claims I did wrong. Growing up, Zoe was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was constantly being told to be more understanding and accommodating of her sensitive nature. If we fought over toys or TV shows, I was always the one expected to give in because Zoe would throw tantrums that disrupted the whole household. Our parents found it easier to make me compromise rather than deal with her emotional meltdowns. This pattern continued throughout our teenage years when Zoe would blame me for various social and academic problems she encountered. If she didn't get invited to a party, it was because I had somehow damaged her reputation. If she struggled with a class, it was because I had distracted her or received too much attention from our parents regarding my own schoolwork. Nothing was ever her fault, it was always something I had done to sabotage her success. The specific incident that Zoe claims justifies her ongoing hostility toward me happened when we were in high school. She had a crush on a guy named Tyler who was in my chemistry class, and apparently I was supposed to somehow facilitate their relationship. When Tyler asked me to be his lab partner for a semester-long project, Zoe accused me of deliberately interfering with her romantic prospects. According to Zoe, I should have declined Tyler's partnership request and suggested he work with her instead, even though she wasn't in our chemistry class and wouldn't have been eligible to be his partner anyway. She convinced herself that I had stolen her boyfriend, even though Tyler and I were never anything more than study partners, and he never showed any romantic interest in either of us. The situation escalated when Tyler and I received an A+ on our final project, and our teacher displayed it as an example of excellent work. Zoe interpreted this academic recognition as proof that I had deliberately undermined her chances with Tyler and had benefited professionally from what she saw as my betrayal of sisterly loyalty. She's been referencing this incident for the past 7 years like it was some unforgivable crime. What made the Tyler situation even more ridiculous was that he ended up dating a girl from another school entirely and never showed any interest in either Zoe or me romantically. But in Zoe's narrative, I had somehow interfered with her destiny and prevented what she was convinced would have been a meaningful relationship. She created an entire fantasy about how her life would have been different if I hadn't been Tyler's lab partner. After high school, I went to college and built a successful career as a graphic designer, while Zoe struggled to find direction in her life. She changed majors 3 times, dropped out of college twice, and has worked a series of temporary jobs that never seemed to lead anywhere permanent. Instead of taking responsibility for her own choices, she blames her difficulties on the confidence issues I supposedly created during our teenage years. Our parents continue to make excuses for Zoe's behavior and regularly pressure me to be more understanding of her struggles. They claim that she's just going through a difficult period and that I should be supportive rather than critical of her life choices. When I point out that she's nearly 30 and should be taking responsibility for her own decisions, they say I'm being unsympathetic to her emotional needs. The dynamic became more toxic when Zoe started making scenes at family gatherings whenever she felt I was receiving too much positive attention. If our parents asked about my work or relationship, she'd find ways to interrupt the conversation or make comments designed to diminish my achievements. She seemed determined to ensure that I couldn't enjoy family time without dealing with her resentment. During family holidays, Zoe would bring up old incidents from our childhood and teenage years, claiming that I had always been favored and that she'd been forced to live in my shadow. She'd reference times when I'd supposedly received better gifts or more attention, completely ignoring instances when our parents had gone out of their way to accommodate her dramatic personality and emotional needs. Last year, I got engaged to my boyfriend Owen, and Zoe's behavior became even more problematic. She made snide comments about our relationship, questioned whether Owen really understood what he was getting into by marrying me, and generally tried to create drama around what should have been a happy family announcement. Our parents asked me to ignore her negativity rather than addressing her inappropriate behavior directly. The engagement seemed to trigger something in Zoe because she started bringing up old grievances, more frequently including the Tyler situation from high school. She told anyone who would listen that I had a pattern of sabotaging her relationships and stealing opportunities that should have been hers. She painted herself as the victim of my supposedly manipulative and selfish behavior. Things reached a breaking point when Zoe started making comments about my upcoming wedding, claiming that I didn't deserve happiness because of how I'd treated her over the years. She suggested that Owen should know the truth about my character before making a permanent commitment. Our parents continued to enable her behavior by asking me to be patient rather than telling her to stop creating problems. The tension came to a head during our monthly family dinner at our parents' house. These gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable as Zoe used them as opportunities to air her grievances and make passive-aggressive comments about my life and choices. I dreaded attending but felt obligated to maintain family relationships despite the toxic atmosphere Zoe created. What frustrated me most about the family dynamic was how our parents had created two completely different sets of expectations for their daughters. I was expected to be mature, understanding, and accommodating, while Zoe was allowed to be emotional, dramatic, and demanding without facing any consequences for her behavior. The double standard had existed for so long that everyone treated it as normal rather than recognizing how unfair and destructive it was. The family dinner that changed everything happened on a Sunday evening in October. Our parents had prepared a traditional meal with all the usual dishes, including Zoe's favorite garlic mashed potatoes that our mom always made specially for her. I arrived with Owen, who was still getting used to the family dynamics and trying to be supportive despite the obvious tension between Zoe and me. The evening started relatively peacefully with normal conversation about work, current events, and holiday plans. But I could sense Zoe's mood darkening as the conversation naturally included updates about my wedding planning and career developments. She became increasingly quiet and sullen whenever anyone showed interest in my life or asked Owen questions about our relationship. About halfway through dinner, Owen mentioned that I'd just landed a major client for my graphic design business and that we were excited about the growth opportunities it represented. Our parents were genuinely pleased and asked questions about the project and what it meant for my career trajectory. For a few minutes, the conversation focused entirely on my professional success. That's when Zoe's expression changed from sullen to actively hostile. She started making comments under her breath about people who get ahead through luck rather than talent. When our father asked her to speak up and share her thoughts, she said loudly that some people just have all the advantages while others have to struggle against unfair circumstances. Our mother tried to redirect the conversation to more neutral topics, but Zoe was clearly building toward one of her dramatic episodes. She started talking about how exhausting it was to watch certain people succeed while dealing with the damage that had been done to her own confidence and opportunities over the years. Everyone at the table knew she was referring to me. Owen looked confused and uncomfortable as he realized that Zoe was somehow turning my professional success into an attack on her personal struggles. He tried to change the subject by asking about family traditions and holiday plans, but Zoe ignored his attempts at polite conversation. She seemed determined to create a confrontation. The breaking point came when our mother complimented the engagement ring Owen had given me and asked about our wedding venue selection. This positive attention toward my upcoming marriage was apparently more than Zoe could tolerate. She put down her fork and launched into a speech about people who get everything handed to them while others suffer the consequences of past betrayals. I finally lost patience with her dramatic behavior and told her directly that she needed to stop making every family gathering about her old grievances. I said that constantly bringing up high school incidents was immature and that she needed to take responsibility for her own life instead of blaming me for her problems. I pointed out that Tyler's situation happened 7 years ago and that it was time to move on. Zoe's reaction was immediate and explosive. She stood up from her chair and screamed that I had no right to tell her to get over anything because I had never acknowledged the damage I'd caused or apologized for ruining her chances with Tyler. She said that I continued to be selfish and manipulative just like I'd always been. That's when she grabbed the serving bowl of mashed potatoes from the center of the table and dumped the entire contents directly into my lap. The hot potatoes covered my dress and legs while she stood there looking satisfied with her dramatic gesture. She said, "There's your payback for Tyler and everything else you've done to me over the years." The silence that followed was complete as everyone processed what had just happened. Owen's mouth was hanging open in shock at witnessing such childish and destructive behavior from a 28-year-old woman. Our parents looked horrified but seemed frozen in place, unsure how to respond to Zoe's escalation of family drama into physical confrontation. I sat there covered in mashed potatoes, feeling a mixture of humiliation, anger, and disbelief that my sister had actually assaulted me during a family dinner over grievances from high school. The hot potatoes were soaking through my dress and burning my skin while Zoe stood over me looking triumphant, like she'd finally gotten her revenge for imaginary crimes. I stayed completely silent for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds while everyone waited to see how I would react to being covered in mashed potatoes by my own sister. Owen started to stand up like he was going to confront Zoe, but I put my hand on his arm to stop him. Our parents were stammering apologies and asking if I was hurt while Zoe continued standing there looking satisfied with her dramatic gesture. Instead of screaming or throwing my own food or creating an even bigger scene, I did something that clearly surprised everyone, including Zoe. I stood up very calmly, wiped mashed potatoes off my hands with my napkin, and said, "I need to go home and change clothes. Owen and I will be leaving now." My voice was steady and controlled, which seemed to unnerve Zoe more than if I'd yelled at her. Our mother immediately started trying to mediate, saying that Zoe was just having a difficult time and that we should all sit down and work through this misunderstanding as a family. She offered to help me clean up and suggested that maybe we could all laugh about this incident someday. Her immediate instinct was to minimize Zoe's behavior and push for reconciliation rather than acknowledging how inappropriate the attack had been. Our father looked embarrassed and kept apologizing while shooting disappointed glances at Zoe, who was still standing there like she expected to be congratulated for her dramatic gesture. He offered to pay for dry cleaning my dress and kept saying that this wasn't how family dinners were supposed to go. But he didn't directly address Zoe's behavior or demand that she apologize. Zoe finally spoke up, saying that she wasn't sorry because I deserved what I got for years of selfish behavior. She said that maybe now I understood how it felt to be humiliated and that she hoped I learned something from the experience. She seemed to think that dumping food on me was justified payback for high school incidents that existed primarily in her imagination. I continued gathering my purse and jacket while Zoe ranted about justice and consequences. Owen was looking back and forth between me and my family like he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. He'd never seen anything like Zoe's behavior before and was clearly shocked by how casually she'd escalated to physical confrontation over old grievances. As we prepared to leave, our mother begged us not to go, saying that we needed to resolve this conflict before it got worse. She kept insisting that Zoe didn't really mean to hurt anyone and was just expressing her frustration in an inappropriate way. She asked me to consider Zoe's emotional state and try to understand why she was acting out. Our father tried a different approach, suggesting that maybe everyone should take some time to cool down and that we could discuss the situation more rationally in a few days. He said that family disagreements sometimes got heated, but that we shouldn't let one incident destroy our relationships. He seemed to genuinely believe that this was just a normal family conflict that could be resolved with time and communication. That's when I delivered the statement that made everyone realize this incident was going to have serious consequences. I looked directly at Zoe and said, "You just assaulted me in front of witnesses because you're still upset about a high school lab partner from 7 years ago. I hope you think it was worth it because you're about to find out what real consequences look like." Zoe's confident expression faltered as she processed the word assault and realized that I wasn't going to treat this as just another family drama to be smoothed over and forgotten. Our parents looked worried as they understood that I was taking this incident much more seriously than they'd expected. The word assault hung in the air as everyone contemplated what it meant in this context. Zoe had physically attacked me with hot food that could have caused serious burns. She'd done it deliberately and maliciously while calling it justified payback. In any other setting, such behavior would be immediately recognized as unacceptable, but our family's history of enabling Zoe had normalized her escalating behavior. Owen supported my assessment of the situation by pointing out that throwing hot food at someone was definitely assault regardless of family relationships or personal grievances. He said that if a stranger had done this to me in a restaurant, everyone would expect criminal charges to be filed. He couldn't understand why family status should provide immunity from consequences for violent behavior. Our parents looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized that Owen and I weren't going to participate in their usual pattern of minimizing Zoe's actions and pushing for immediate reconciliation. They'd spent years protecting Zoe from consequences and couldn't seem to understand that this incident had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Owen and I left without further discussion while our parents tried to convince Zoe to call and apologize. But I had no intention of accepting any apology because this incident had finally given me the clarity I needed about my relationship with my sister and my family's enabling of her toxic behavior. During the drive home, Owen kept asking if I was okay and expressing disbelief about what had just happened. He said he'd never seen an adult throw food at someone during a family dinner and couldn't understand how my parents were trying to minimize such obviously inappropriate behavior. He was supportive of whatever I decided to do in response. Owen also pointed out that the mashed potatoes had been quite hot and could have caused serious burns if they'd hit my face or other sensitive areas. He said that Zoe's attack could have resulted in emergency room visits and permanent scarring. The fact that I'd only suffered minor discomfort was more about luck than Zoe's restraint or consideration for my safety. That night, I made the decision that would change my family dynamic forever. I wasn't going to treat this as just another one of Zoe's dramatic episodes to be ignored and forgotten. She had physically attacked me during a family dinner and called it justified payback for imaginary grievances. It was time for her to face real consequences for her actions. I spent several hours researching my options and preparing for what I knew would be a difficult conversation with my family. Zoe had escalated beyond verbal harassment to physical confrontation, and I wasn't going to enable her behavior by pretending it was acceptable. She was about to learn that actions have consequences even when your parents have spent years protecting you from them. The more I thought about the incident, the angrier I became about the years of enabling that had led to this moment. Zoe had been allowed to blame me for her problems, hold grudges over imaginary slights, and create drama at family gatherings without ever facing meaningful consequences. Our parents' refusal to set boundaries had only encouraged her to escalate her behavior until she felt entitled to physically attack me over high school grievances. Monday morning, I took photos of my stained dress and documented the minor burns on my legs from the hot mashed potatoes. Then I drove to the local police station and filed a formal complaint for assault and battery against Zoe. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic and explained that throwing hot food at someone definitely constituted assault regardless of the family relationship involved. The police called Zoe that afternoon to inform her that charges had been filed and that she needed to appear in court to answer for her actions. According to my mother, who called me in a panic, Zoe was completely shocked that I had involved law enforcement in what she considered a family matter. She apparently expected me to just move on and forget about the incident like I'd done with her previous outbursts. My parents were horrified that I had pressed charges against my own sister and immediately started a campaign to convince me to drop the complaint. They said that involving the police would destroy our family relationships and create permanent damage that could never be repaired. They claimed that Zoe had learned her lesson and would never behave that way again. But I explained to my parents that 28-year-old adults who assault family members during dinner need to face legal consequences for their actions. I pointed out that their years of enabling Zoe's behavior had only made her more entitled and aggressive. I said that maybe facing real consequences would finally force her to take responsibility for her choices. The legal proceedings moved quickly, and Zoe was required to appear before a judge within 2 weeks. She hired a lawyer who tried to argue that the incident was just a family disagreement that got out of hand. But the evidence was clear, including witness statements from Owen and our parents, plus photographic documentation of my stained clothing and minor injuries. Zoe was convicted of simple assault and sentenced to anger management classes, plus community service and a fine. She was also issued a restraining order that prohibited her from contacting me directly or coming within 100 feet of my home or workplace. The judge made it clear that throwing hot food at someone was unacceptable behavior, regardless of family relationships or personal grievances. The conviction appeared in the local newspaper's court records section, which meant that Zoe's assault charge became public knowledge. Several of her coworkers and acquaintances saw the listing and started asking questions about what had happened. Her professional reputation suffered as people learned that she'd been convicted of assaulting her own sister over old grudges. But the most devastating consequence for Zoe was losing her job when her employer decided that someone with an assault conviction wasn't suitable for their customer service position. She'd been working as a receptionist at a medical office where patient interactions required someone with proven emotional stability and professional behavior. The conviction raised questions about her judgment and temperament. Zoe's financial situation became precarious without steady employment, and she had to move back in with our parents while looking for work. The irony wasn't lost on me that her dramatic gesture of payback had resulted in her becoming even more dependent on family support while facing legal consequences and professional embarrassment. My parents continued pressuring me to forgive Zoe and help her get back on her feet, but I maintained firm boundaries about any contact or assistance. I explained that she'd made an adult decision to assault me and now needed to handle the adult consequences of that choice. I said that my concern was protecting myself from future attacks, not helping her recover from self-inflicted problems. The restraining order meant that Zoe couldn't attend family gatherings where I was present, which effectively ended her participation in most family events. Our parents tried to create separate celebrations to accommodate both of us, but eventually realized that Zoe's behavior had created a permanent division in our family relationships. 6 months after the assault conviction, Zoe finally sent a letter through our parents apologizing for her behavior and asking if we could work toward reconciliation. But the apology focused mainly on how the consequences had affected her life rather than acknowledging the impact of her actions on me. She seemed more concerned about restoring her own comfort than understanding why her behavior was unacceptable. I responded through my parents that I wasn't interested in reconciliation with someone who had spent years harboring grudges over imaginary offenses and had escalated to physical violence when confronted about her behavior. I said that the restraining order would remain in place and that I considered our relationship permanently severed. Owen and I got married 6 months later in a beautiful ceremony that Zoe couldn't attend due to the restraining order. Our parents were there, but the absence of family drama made the celebration much more peaceful and enjoyable than it would have been with Zoe's presence. Several relatives commented on how relaxed and happy everyone seemed without her toxic energy. A year later, Zoe was still struggling to rebuild her life after the consequences of her mashed potato attack. She'd found part-time work, but struggled to advance professionally with an assault conviction on her record. She'd completed anger management classes, but our parents reported that she still blamed me for overreacting rather than taking full responsibility for her choices. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best response to family toxicity is to enforce real consequences rather than enabling destructive behavior. Zoe had spent years thinking that family relationships protected her from accountability, but discovered that assault is assault regardless of who commits it. My decision to press charges finally forced her to face the reality that actions have consequences even when your parents have spent decades protecting you from them. The family dynamic was forever changed, but in many ways it was healthier without Zoe's constant drama and grudge holding. Our parents eventually accepted that their enabling had contributed to the problem and started setting better boundaries in their relationship with Zoe. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them experience the natural consequences of their choices, rather than protecting them from reality.